Hi, Zarqa.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can see you. It's an honor and a pleasure to speak with you.
Oh, thank you.
My name is Arpita.
Good to meet you,
Nice to
Arpita.
meet you too, Zarqa. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Word on the Street's Great Book Stage. My name is Arpita Koshal, and I'll be your host during this next event featuring Zarqa Nawaz. Before we begin this event, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the history of the place where we are gathered today. The City of Toronto exists because of the Toronto Purchase, also known as Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation in 1805, with a final claim settlement in 2010. This territory is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit to care for and share the resources around the Great Lakes in peace, which we all now share responsibility in upholding. The Dish with One Spoon was born in part out of the Anishinaabe concept of all our relations, which is the awareness that we are all connected to and reflected in all the living and non-living beings around us. Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples with long histories on this land. And acknowledging this is only the first step in building a practice of land stewardship and Indigenous solidarity that honors these peoples. I am grateful to live and work on this land. Now, please join me in welcoming Zarqa Nawaz, author of Jameela Green Ruins Everything.
Thank,
Yes, I love this book.
thank you.
Zarqa created the series Little Mosque on the Prairie, which premiered in 2007 to record ratings on CBC television. She's written a best-selling memoir, Laughing All the Way to the Mosque. Both her novel, Jameela Green Ruins Everything, and her CBC Gem web series, Zarqa, came out this spring. So, Zarqa, as we begin, I wonder if you want to start by reading an excerpt from your book, Jameela Green Ruins Everything.
Absolutely. I will start with chapter 2. It's a little shorter, and I'll start reading. Mosques are like bad boyfriends. Jamila parked in front of a squat, sandy colored building. You always feel judged. She looked up at the sky, where surely God was looking down at her disapprovingly. I hate this place, said Jamila, getting out of the car. And you, of all, you should know why. Yesterday's disastrous book launch had forced her hand. God was out to get her, and Jamila needed to do damage control before something worse happened, like she got transformed into an ant that only Malcolm Gladwell could hear. When Jamal was alive, going to the mosque back home in Brooklyn had been an adventure. The mosque was always fuller on the Fridays when he gave the sermon. He talked about avoiding the forbidden or haram, like alcohol and drugs, but was also talking about taqwa, the feeling of God flowing through your heart, and always ended his sermon with his favorite verse in the Quran. And your Lord says, call upon me and I will respond to you. But Jamila had stopped talking to God long ago. What was the point? Faith, fun, frivolity had extinguished when Jamal suddenly died. That had been 25 years ago. Now, 39, Jamila had hoped over a decade of marriage and motherhood would have eased her pain, but instead she found herself drifting further and further away from the people she loved. The stucco walls of the mosque had cracks near the door and windows. The grass near the entrance hadn't been mowed, and the weeds were threatening the small flower garden. It was fall in Liverspot, North Dakota, and red and yellow leaves clogged the rain gutters. You should really take out the half-wits who run this place. Aren't burning hailstones your weapon of choice? Jamila sighed. She was pretty sure that asking God to murder idiots was haram. Why was she always such a bitch? Her daughter Lily would tell her life itself seemed to make her angry. And whose fault is that? She mouthed while staring at the sky. leery about attracting the hailstones. Atheists had it easy. God wasn't ruining their lives. Then she remembered the last words Jamal had spoken to her. Don't whine. Wine is haram. She took a breath. This was harder than she originally thought. Jameela hadn't entered a mosque since Jamal's death, but Lily raved about the Imam here. He was the only one who had given her solace when their cat Billy died of cancer. Somehow, Jameela's motherly exhortations of life is cruel hadn't helped. She wiped away a tear, felt for Jamal's prayer beads in her jacket pocket, gave them a quick rub, and reached for the scarf in her purse. Ibrahim vacuumed the stairs after prayers were over, and the mosque was almost empty. The board of the mosque believed it was unseemly for the imam to perform this lowly task, especially since they had hired someone else to do it. But Ibrahim felt that a weekly cleaning wasn't enough. He had visited the local church across the street. The wood was polished and buffed to such a high sheen that it looked like glass. He had been putting off having the minister visit the mosque until he felt the mosque was just as pristine. It was a matter of pride for him. Remembering the hadith of the Prophet doing his own household chores, washing and mending his own garments, he wanted to be the imam of the most spotless mosque anyone had ever seen. And to be perfectly honest, the cleaning helped soothe his nerves in this new land. As he finished the stairs and started towards the front lobby, he saw a black Honda CRV parked in front of the doors. A woman with black shoulder length hair emerged from the car and stood staring at the mosque with what appeared to be great interest. He wondered if it was her first time. The woman put on a turquoise scarf dotted with orange paisley pattern and entered the building. She stared at the shoe rack for a few seconds. He decided to break her reverie. There is much room for your shoes here, he said gently, knowing his Arabic inflected voice would identify him as a newcomer to this country. The woman jumped slightly. Thank you, she says as she bent down to put her shoes in one of the slots. He noticed a string of blue marble prayer beads on the floor and put them in his pocket. You just missed Zohar prayer, he said, but you're welcome to stay and wait for us, sir. I'm sorry for interrupting your vacuuming. I'm looking for the Imam. Do you know where he is? I am the Imam, Ibrahim could see the look of disbelief on her face. She had mistaken him for the janitor, even though he wore his Imam garb, which was composed of a long white robe and a black skull cap. Maybe he should consider a name tag, as one board member had suggested. You're a little too young to be the Imam, she said, scrutinizing him. Usually the Imam is older and angrier. Ibrahim felt defensive. I am 25, but I finished my training in Al Azhar. It is one of the most respected Islamic institutions in the world. Yeah, I don't care if you were trained at the Vatican, as long as you're the real deal. Ibrahim unplugged the vacuum and wound up the long yellow electrical cord. There was a knot. The woman took it from him and started to undo it. Where did you grow up? Asked Jameela. Ibrahim stepped back, unhappy with the question. It always made him feel inadequate. In a small village in Egypt, I am new to the West, but I feel I have already learned much from this community, and I can offer. She put her hand to stop him. You had me at small village. That's good. You haven't been corrupted yet. Corrupted by what? Life. God likes people like you, all innocent and idealistic, people who still think life is about hope and meaning. Her words sounded like a compliment, but Ibrahim knew they were not. She stared at the knot of the cord as if she could undo it with her eyes alone. God is messing with me. I did nothing to God. Well, maybe I stopped believing in him. Does that offend you? Not believing in God? He asked. He wanted to say yes, very much, thinking that God might be a woman and then not believing in her. He took a moment. This was the first time he'd had to think about such a thing, and he hoped his eyes would not betray him. In Islam, God does not belong to any gender. It is a limitation of the English language to insist on a gendered pronoun. But in Arabic, the word God or Allah is genderless. So you can refer to God as a woman if you prefer. There's no insult since there is nothing insulting about women. Had this concept ever occurred to his instructors at Al Azhar? Probably not. As for not believing in God, this worries me, but you are here in a mosque, so that is a good sign. Oh, I've decided to believe in God, but I'm having some issues. Man, this place is a dump. Ibrahim could not argue with her there. In Egypt, a mosque was made of stone and marble, and it was the pride of the community. But here, it resembled a dusty pawn shop. He chastised himself for thinking this way. He realized that his mind had drifted for a few seconds, and now they were both standing awkwardly in the lobby. My name is Jameela, by the way, she said, sticking out her hand. Ibrahim stared at the hand as if it was a creature from outer space. He knew shaking hands with the opposite sex was a custom here, but it seemed too forward to him. He needed more time to get used to it. Jameela pulled her hand back. An ant crawled onto Ibrahim's arm, and he took out his pocket handkerchief, gently brushed the ant onto it, closed the fabric around it like a protective parachute, and opened the door and flung the creature outside. Ibrahim watched his actions closely. My daughter does the same thing. She said you inspired her with the story of Prophet Suleiman and the ants. Ibrahim didn't know what shocked him more, that God may be a woman or a teenager being inspired by him. He thought for a moment. Definitely the teenager. Let us continue our discussion in here, he said as he took off a chain, took off a chain from around his neck with several keys on a ring. He unlocked a door beside the shoe filing cabinet and led her into the mosque library. The woman sat down on the dilapidated brown leather sofa that gave off a tired hiss. The imam sat opposite her on a ratty green and yellow plaid sofa. My brother had encouraged me to be a writer. He died, but I kept writing, and my memoir finally got published. And I prayed for my book launch to go well, and God screwed me over. The woman was tired and needed someone to talk to. She had circles under her eyes and seemed sad. That does not sound like God, he said. Yeah, well, clearly God doesn't have a problem with you. You probably believed in her your whole life, so you get a free pass. Me, however, she's sticking it to. She looked into his eyes imploringly. He picked up two books from the table. When he put them back in their designated spots on the second shelf, as if by magic, a single Arabic word embossed in gold stretched across the spines of the set like a glittering dragon. So you want me to help you get God to give me the thing I want and deserve, especially after taking away my brother. That's the only way I'll stop believing God is a monster. Ibrahim felt nausea rise up to his throat. He poured himself water from the dispenser in the room, but it didn't help. Thank God his lunch had been digested by now so that he didn't toss his cookies, a saying in the West that had never made sense to him, given the variety of things one could expel during times of spiritual crisis. He took out a pocket handkerchief and wiped the perspiration off his brow and upper lip. God wasn't a vengeful creator. After all, every chapter of the Quran started with a reminder of her mercy. And while it was true that sometimes God's tests were difficult, Ibrahim believed in God's promise that after every hardship there was ease. But he had never encountered someone so bitter before. Go back to basics. Ibrahim moved to the next shelf and straightened those books as well. You must be patient. I'm done with being patient. My brother died over 20 years ago, so I've done my time. Now I have a major ask. Jameela jumped up and snatched a paper cup from the pile beside the water dispenser. Ibrahim assumed she was about to fill it. Instead, she crushed it in her hand and threw it in the garbage can. I want my book to become #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. Tell me how to get what I want from God. She sat back down and dug her fingers into the cracked leather of the sofa and made a hole. You have a degree from Al-Hazar, for God's sake. What's your name anyway? Ibrahim plucked the cup from the garbage can and placed it into the blue recycling bin. His nausea seemed to abate. Ibrahim, like the prophet? Yes, my mother, as people here would say, was a fan. He smiled at the memory of his mother. She died last year. It was pancreatic cancer, which I did not know could spread so rapidly. But by the grace of God, there was not too much pain. Her only wish for him was to be an imam, and he had succeeded. Ibrahim opened the dark mahogany cabinet and rooted around until he found a bottle of Windex and a box of rags. Joy unfurled in his chest. He made a silent prayer of thanks to God. This is what heaven must feel like. How do I make God answer my prayers? Said Jameela. She crossed her arms, reminding Ibrahim of one of his 5-year-old students. It is a question many have asked before you, said Ibrahim, trying to sound profound. Despite this woman's unorthodox language and approach, she was asking the same question all people who struggle with faith ask. And it was his duty to help her. If he couldn't save her soul, then what use was he as an imam? Why is this prayer so important to you? Because being #1 in the New York Times means you have made it as a writer. I'm pushing 40. If I don't succeed at writing, I'll be stuck selling crop insurance to farmers in Liverspot, North Dakota for the rest of my life. And my brother would be. She stopped talking and seemed to lose herself in thought. Ibrahim brought her a paper cup and she gratefully crushed. as she that she gratefully crushed. As Ibrahim ran the rag over the window, he pondered her question again. At least with marriage problems or drug excess, one could recommend counselors, but God coercion was different. Make God listen. Another man in a shalwar kameez approached. He must have come early for Asr prayer and had overheard Jamila's raised voice from the lobby. Do you need help, brother? He asked. Yes, could you clean the outside of this window? There is dirt on the other side. Ibrahim handed him a fresh rag and a spray bottle. Actually, I meant, can I help you with the other matter? Said the unhappy man, taking the tools and nodding towards Jamila. Sister Jamila is in need of my advice, but the window outside has not been cleaned in years, said Ibrahim and shut the door. His pride was pricked at the suggestion that he might need assistance. The man appeared outside and stared dejectedly at the two of them through the window as he sprayed. Ibrahim found his disconsolate face distracting, so he shut the drapes. Ibrahim had taken a course in counseling before he took this job. His advisors had recommended it, and now he was grateful. This woman was clearly on the edge, and it was his moral duty to help her. He straightened the pamphlets on the wall unit. The cleaning had reinvigorated him. You have to prove to God that you are sincere. You cannot expect something for nothing. But I've started praying. No, you have to show more, how do you say, concrete effort. Like what? Volunteering at a soup kitchen or giving money to charity? That sort of thing? Ibrahim thought for a second. Those were good things, but she would do them as robotic acts and be unsatisfied. He needed something that would alter her mental state. He saw a pamphlet entitled Be a Good Muslim Neighbor with an illustration of a woman giving a coin to a person sitting cross-legged in the street. You have to find a homeless person and help solve their problems. Jamila's eyes widened. What? No, you can't help the homeless. They want to live in the streets. I'm pretty sure there are studies that prove it. Ibrahim's nausea returned. He made a mental note to stock Imodium in the library for future spiritual guidance sessions with this woman. No, that is what you must do. Otherwise, God won't answer your prayers. How do you know that? God's not speaking to you. Is she? Is there a grilled cheese sandwich with words on it? I only eat falafels, he said, wondering how a grilled cheese sandwich was connected to the divine. He would Google that later. He was nervous about having presumed God's will. He needed to pray for absolution. But if he went into the prayer hall now, this obsessed woman would follow him. Please, God, just don't let me ruin her life and mine along with it. He'd never thought that being an imam could be this dangerous. His father had always told him to go into plumbing. Just do as I say and then come back, he said. Usually he'd recommend extra prayers or charitable donations. This was the first time he'd recommended someone actually leave their home and change someone else's life. He hoped his advice would humble her to tune in to the needs of those around her. Jamila looked at him, but her thoughts were clearly elsewhere. He cleared his throat, and she came out of her dreamlike state. I'll do it on one condition, said Jamila. You come with me.
Thank you. Pivotal chapter that sets everything off and hilarious. Thank you, Zarqa. Okay, well, one of the elements that I responded to and I took notice of right away was your ability to depict really serious themes like radicalism, terrorism, religious fundamentalism, and the trauma of death, alongside laugh out loud comedy. And the effect is really one of the most thought-provoking and hilarious books I've read in a really long time. Do you want to speak a little bit about how you created this fusion?
Yeah, I'm one of those people that really has a hard time reading very long, sonorous, serious subject matter, especially about serious issues. And botched American foreign policy in the Middle East. It's a really serious issue. But I find that I tune out after a while and I just can't focus. And I know I should care about these issues, but I find it hard to care about things that haven't really understood or digested well. And I find comedy is a way to reach people, the widest group of people, and to talk to them about an issue that otherwise is really difficult or not really, interesting to make, to be blunt. And I knew that this whole issue of the two Gulf Wars in, Iraq, the invasion of Iraq, especially in 2003, the Russian invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, and the repercussions that have happened for decades have destabilized and created power vacuums in the region and have resulted in groups like ISIS being formed. But it's such a complicated history and such a complicated issue. But I feel like if we don't really talk about these things and deal with them, we're never really going to start solving some of the problems that have come around, like the refugee crisis of young women and children who, their mothers had joined ISIS as teenagers. This was a cult-like group. They immediately regretted their decision, either tried to escape or were caught or were not able to escape. And today they are sitting in refugee camps. The Western governments have stripped them of their citizenship. Babies are now children being raised, and everyone just sort of wants to put their head in the sand and say, let's just, it was their fault. They don't deserve a fair trial or sentencing and closure because they're not, and so their humanity has been taken away. And I feel like if I can bring humanity back to these stories, then maybe we could reignite the discussions. We can't, like to say, we can't always Guantanamo away everything. Like you send these men away to Guantanamo Bay, you don't give them a trial, a sentence, and they probably would have been out by now if they had been sentenced. And so I thought to myself, what's one way to reach people and to get these issues out in a way that's digestible, but also fun and entertaining. And I hate to say it, but you have to make these issues fun and entertaining because it's the way to reach a widest group of people, because otherwise people will just want to just put it aside and pretend it never happened, or it doesn't really matter. And and i want and there are real human repercussions for real people if we keep doing this over and over again. And this was my way of trying to get the story out and to get people to talk about it, and maybe one day hopefully deal with some of these situations like the women and children that are still languishing in these refugee camps.
You've done a masterful job. Um, Speaking of, let's talk about Jameela. So Jameela is a magnetic character, an unlikely heroine who is a force of nature. She's equal parts narcissistic and shallow, and at the same time resourceful, loyal, and resolute. You root for her while rolling your eyes. I want to be her friend. How did you conceive Jameela?
Well, I mean, I won't lie to you. A lot of it is autobiographical in the sense that I did write a memoir called Laughing All the Way to the Mosque, which has not become number one on the New York Times bestseller list, which made me very bitter and vindictive and angry at God. And so a lot of those prayers came from a real place. I was actually talking to God and saying, I don't get it. Like all these other writers don't even believe in you. Why do you give them so much success? Here I am praying 5 times a day and you're not even listening. And what is the point of being Muslim? What is the point in, being spiritual? What is the point in, all this prayer and have patience? Like, how long does one have to be patient? And so there was this feeling of professional failure and loss. And so I was writing the book while I was feeling all these things. And so it's imbued with all those feelings that are coming from a real place. And, as a practicing Muslim, those are feelings that I always struggle with, because we are taught to be patient and and to pray, and that God is always listening and always answering, but I expect those answers in a very tangible materialistic way. And so that's always a question in my mind, like, how are prayers answered? Why are they not answered? Or are they answered in a way that we can't see them, and what's the point? What's the point? Right. And so I'm always asking these questions, and people who advise me are always just appalled and shocked by my shallowness and my vindictive narcissistic nature. And so there's this sense of oh my God, she says these things out loud, who does this thing? And so I thought, okay, I'm just going to create a character who believes and thinks the way I do, and who meets an imam in the way I do in my real life, and have these discussions, and maybe I can process sort of my spiritual angst through writing. And so it became a form of therapy for me to express how I was feeling, while at the same time, dealing with the whole issue of ISIS in the Middle East, and try to fuse those two issues together. And so it became a form of writing therapy for me, and having the Imam Ibrahim talk to me and me talk to Ibrahim, and work out all my feelings, and then have him console me. And so And so by the time I got to the end, I had sort of come through this kind of spiritual journey of, recovery. So that is the truth about Jameela and who she is and how I relate to her and how she relates to me. Because it is very similar to the things that I go through and continue to go through and still go through when I pray. Even now I'm like, well, why isn't this book going to number one on the New York Times bestseller list? And I'm thinking, are we going to go through this whole cycle every time I write a book? And the answer is yes. Yes, I am.
Well, speaking of religion and faith, then, it's one of the central themes in the novel. And we see that the different characters have very individual relationships with Islam. And the plot is set off by Jameela making a self serving pact with Allah to put her memoir on the New York Times bestseller list. And at one point, she said, quid pro quo. And on the other hand is her 25-year-old Imam, Ibrahim, whose faith is pure and sincere and without guile. And you've interspersed first-person prayers of different characters among the chapters, giving readers a really clear window into their desires, their worries, their fears. And we understand their motivations very quickly. It's a really creative narrative device, and I wanted to know if you wanted to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I feel that like we live in a very strongly secular world where stories about spirituality and belief in God aren't really encouraged or don't tend to burn up the New York Times bestseller list. And I like to kind of push back against that and say there are a lot of people out there for which faith is very important to them, but we're all kind of silent about it and don't like to talk about it out loud lest we be seen as those people. And I didn't want to hide behind that spirituality. I wanted it front and center in the book. And I wanted people to feel that you can talk about your belief system openly and without humiliation or shame and say, this is what I believe. Like, I actually live like this, think like this. It's part of my heart and soul. And I want the book to reflect that belief system. And it was a great tool to get into people's minds in terms of speaking in the first person to be able to say what they're feeling and thinking and their relationship with God. And it was also a great way of explaining their outlook of the world and how they go through the world and what they're feeling and thinking, and also their communication with the divine. So I really wanted that to be a very strong part of the book, so that people who have faith or even people who don't have faith can understand and relate to these characters, because even people who don't have faith believe in something, and they can understand that this person is having heartfelt communication with her creator, and she's going through a lot of pain and she's asking for guidance and help. And even Ibrahim, who is someone who is very pure, also goes through his own spiritual and emotional journey by meeting Jameela, where he himself was tested in a way that he didn't think he would be. And in a way, both of them start off the book in places of arrogance, where one believes they have all the answers, and one believes that they're deserving of all the answers, and they intersect. And then you hear their communication with God and see how it changes over time as they meet and transform each other and change. And that was a really great device to get that message across.
Really well. Um, so you read in the second chapter that Jameela lives with her daughter Lily and her husband Murray in Liver Spot, North Dakota. I've been to North Dakota. And I'm itching to know, why this setting? What's Liver Spot like in your mind's eye?
I knew I was going to set it in an American location because I was dealing with a very American story, which was the two Gulf Wars. A lot of terrible things happened to Muslims in the United States after 9/11, the Patriot Act. We had a lot of people in our mosques, but a lot more in the United States, undercover officers. We had young men who were you know, just on based on very little evidence, things that they said, jailed, from up to 15 to 20 years uh, by these draconian laws that had been passed. And a lot of young people lost their youth after 9/11 because of these laws. And I wanted to talk about those issues, and placing it in this little town centered those stories. And also, I live in the prairies, so the prairies are a really important part of my life. I live in Regina, so we're above North Dakota. So I wanted to have some, like, in terms of landscape and just the feeling of the prairies, the farmers. Jameela sells insurance to farmers for crop and hail insurance, and those are important things when you live in the prairies. Growing crops is a life and death situation, and so I wanted to sort of capture sort of my own, where I lived, and the area, and then the capture the fact that it was in America and what had happened after 9/11 to a lot of Muslim communities, and the racial profiling. And I was just at, yesterday, a show by Hassan Minaj, and he was talking about some of the people that had gone to jail and how they're coming out now, um, because of those laws that had been passed. And I wanted to sort of revisit that whole era and time place. And so putting it in the US helped me get back into that time frame, because it is a very American story, what had happened at that time after 9/11, and the hate crimes against Muslims, as well. And so placing it there helped situate the story for me in my mind. And so I felt that was the best place to put it. And then liver spot, just because it's such a funny, it's such a funny word. And it had the word spot in it. So, and I figured there probably wouldn't. And I did check, there wasn't a town called Liver Spot, North Dakota, so no one could come after me later and say, hey, that's where I live, and are those my people? So I wanted to give a name that didn't actually exist on the map.
There's a lot of description of food in Jameela Green Ruins Everything. Sorry, I chose the wrong moment to bring that up. Description after description after description of delicious food, Western food, Pakistani food, Indian food. And I wanted to know if you wanted to talk a little bit, because some of the most tense scenes in the novel take place over food. Like Jamila and Uncle Aziz eating, and the way that he's chewing, and her making a decision about whether she should reach for the samosa or not. It's it's an amazing device, and just being able to visualize these characters having a very serious conversation while they're stuffing their faces.
I love descriptions of food. I love reading about food. I just find it evokes memory, you know, and just situates you immediately, like, because smell and food, especially foods of your childhood. So I immediately go to, and I think I was also writing during Ramadan because it took me so long to write. And whenever you write during Ramadan, you will immediately start writing about food very descriptively. And so, and I love the idea of the textures of food, the colors of food, um, and letting people into that world. I love letting people into the world, my world. This is my world of my childhood favorites. Whenever I live in Saskatchewan, whenever I go to home, to Toronto to visit my mom, she makes my favorites, the things that she knows I love. And I feel like that's a universal theme for everyone. Like, everybody has their childhood favorite types of food, and they like to share it with other people. So I like to share the things that I grew up with and really really love, and just sort of the intersectionality of our cultures, right? Because being Muslim, I ate a lot of Arab food and Arab desserts, and I wanted to describe those, and the scents, like the like orange blossom and jasmine and cardamom, and like those smells are so evocative. And I loved, my mind immediately goes to certain places when I smell those foods and taste those foods. And I just feel it's such a great tool to ease the tension in a scene where, because people need to pause and think when they're in a difficult situation, and eating is a great way to think, give yourself sense of a time to think. Especially, and there's one scene where Lily is dealing with a CIA operative, and without giving it away, it's the food and her knowledge of food that she uses to her advantage to get what she wants, because she's half Pakistani and half white, and she's learned both cultures and the power of food and how you can distract people with food, and how and there's even a scene where there's a man who has a kink for cookies dipped in tea that are sucked out. The slurping sound, like he has this kind of kink and fetish. And I thought, oh, that was so funny. Like, if I could link food to attraction and distraction, and buying time, and link it to all our lives, because food is such an intimate part of each of our lives, and it's universal. Every culture has, like, certain tastes and smells and types of food that are iconic to them. And so I wanted to really lean into that, and explore it. I love other people's writings. When I learn about other cultures and worlds through food and what they eat, and I want to be able to get those items and also experience those things. And memory is so is evoked through eating and taste and smell. So I love to eat. So those are really important things to me. So I love to write about things that I really find enjoyable and fun, and make them enjoyable and fun in the writing.
Well, I loved it. There's a portion in the book that I actually read out loud to my son. It's when Jameela arrives in Pakistan. I'm not giving too much away, I think. And she's having tea and biscuits. And there's a comment on Royal Dalton and the polo, the man playing polo stamped on the chocolate biscuit. And I had to stop reading because we were laughing so hard. And the connection between colonialism and food. It was just brilliant. I have some quick questions for you, like a lightning round, Zarqa, and then I'm going to pause and see if anybody in the audience has some questions for you about this book. So, no story of South Asian-based characters would be complete without the extended family, the uncles and aunties, that are a fixture of our growing up and absolutely no relation to us whatsoever. What's the most outrageous thing that an auntie or uncle has ever said to you?
Oh my God, there's so many. Um, so many. Like, I remember, like, they were when I was young, when I was younger, they would always surround me in mosques and ask me, if I was pregnant when I wasn't. And then when I would say no, they would refuse to believe me and bring more women around me, and they would be examining me and more carefully. and trying to figure out if I was lying. And I would be so upset. I would be going home to my husband, and he'd be like, that's just the way the aunties are. And my kids were like, you should just say yes and try to get a party out of it, and try to but don't ask for like baby toys, just ask for like lots of gift cards. And when they just notice that you just don't seem to be getting bigger, like you seem to be in a permanent state of about 2 to 3 months, they'll figure it out. But you should, and then now my husband says, when, if anyone says that to me, he's like, you shouldn't be insulted. Like, you should be so happy that they still think you look young enough to be fertile. And I'm like, you are not helping. Nobody is helping, right? But our people are so, yeah, I mean, they're sincere, but they're also just like, they never know when to let go.
No boundaries.
There's no boundaries.
No boundaries. You call them auntie, and that's it. You're related. You're linked for life. Were any of the characters other than Jameela inspired by anyone in your life?
The characters other than Jameela, I have met a lot of our imams in the Muslim community are Egyptian, and they're all these very gentle men who are so kind, and they give so much of themselves. And I've had some of the closest relationships in the mosque with Egyptian imams, and I felt I really wanted to show someone who's struggling with just trying to fit in as a newcomer and his spirituality, and someone like Jameela, who's just as characters that like the larger than life. I wanted to show that he was really an important character to me, like a spiritual guide in my life. I have had a lot of spiritual guides in my life, and just the kindness and the gentleness, which I mean, you cannot shock them with anything. Like you can just say the most outrageous things and they just nod and look at you, and they just sort of, help you, tell you that everything's going to be all right, and not to worry. And they give you this sense of calm and ease. And I wanted to reflect that in this character, this poor this poor Ibrahim, who's going to go through so much because of agreeing to help this woman. And so that was one of the most important characters. My children are very similar to Lily. Uh, my children are very different from me. I find that your kids tend to be different from me. Like if you're a super organized person, they tend to be a little less organized because they feel like you're taking care of it all. But if you're like me, a very scattered, vindictive, bitter, shallow person, they end up being very moral and calm and organized. And they're always like, whenever I read terrible reviews of my book on Goodreads, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna, and they're like, step away from the keyboard, let's move the computer away. You are no longer allowed to read Goodread reviews. You are gonna not communicate with anyone, or you're not gonna say anything in Facebook. They're like always like taking stuff, social media away from me. Let's take that phone away from you. Let's not respond. Let's be a better person. Let's rise above this. Right. And so I feel like they're always kind of managing me and my emotional upheaval. And, because I'm always up here like freaking out, and they're like, okay, we've got to like calm her down, put things in perspective. And so whenever I'm saying things like, I'll never be a success, I'll never have anything, they're like, you already have everything. You already are a success. There's nothing more you actually need in life. You just are not grateful enough and don't acknowledge what you have. And so like they're like always, the voice of reason in my head. And I'm always like, oh yeah, maybe you're right. I mean, it lasts for about like 5 minutes before I like revert back to my natural state of like anxiety and high tension and, what's going on. Yeah. So those were characters I wanted to, get into the book, and because they are very representational of people I've met and, who look after me, because I need a lot of looking after.
It's a lovely, lovely character. Um, let's see. I was going to ask what advice you would like to give to writers, but I'm wondering if that advice might be don't read your reviews on Goodreads.
Yeah, don't do that.
Step away from Goodreads.
Step away from the keyboard. Don't say to yourself, oh, I'll straighten this person out. They misunderstood. I'll just help them understand. Don't. You will not be able to do it. Don't engage. Just I guess my advice, because people always say to me, like, who's your audience? Who are you trying to talk to? And to be honest, when I start writing, I don't say to myself, oh, this is my demographic and this is the person. I just start writing about what's important to me, what matters to me, what I wish I could get out into the world, what's confusing me, what I wish I could learn more about. Those are the things, like when I started the novel in 2014, when ISIS first emerged, and everyone was saying, oh, that's natural this is what Muslims do. They became radical jihadis. That's a natural part of their faith. And they always gravitate towards extremism. And I remember getting really upset and going, that's not true. There's a whole background and a history, a political history to this group, but we just don't know what it is. And I wanted to understand it for myself. And then I wanted to help other people understand it. And so that's where a lot of my writing comes from. Like when I don't understand things, or I get very upset about certain things politically, and I want to help people understand, and I want to understand it myself. And so I am also doing it for self-therapy and to help myself get over some pain or issue that I'm going through. So I like to fuse those two elements and, help my sort of have an emotional, healing, and as well as understanding an issue in the world that I'm having difficulty grappling with, and then to make it accessible and enjoyable for people. So I'm sure there's probably, given the cover and the title, there's a lot of people thought, oh, this will be a great beach read. And then here they are learning about the invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 and going, okay. And then they come out of it. And I want them to come out of it thinking this was a really hilarious, funny story. I really enjoyed it as a story, as an entertainment alone. And if there's a little part of them that says, oh, but I wouldn't mind learning more about this and this because I didn't know that was quite shocking, then I feel that's good too. And the book works on two different levels.
Lee. Now, Zarqa, you're an actor as well as a writer. And as I read the book, I could see it in my head. I could see Nusrat, Jameela's mother, very, very clearly. And I'm wondering, I feel strongly it's going to be turned into a movie. I really do. Who would you cast in the roles?
That's a great question. I would love to play Jamila. I would love because I feel like I know this character. Would, as my children say, it would not require a lot of acting. It's like, your range is this much, so it's good that this character just falls in that range, right? I just did a CBC gem series called Zarqa, also about a bitter, vindictive Muslim woman. And I felt I was able to play that character. And I took acting classes for a year to prepare myself to play that role. And I actually enjoyed it so much. I didn't think I would enjoy it as much as I did. And I thought to myself, if I can, keep this up, maybe do a second season of the web series, then I would gain enough skills that I could earn the right to play Jameela. Hopefully I would like to adapt it into either a limited television series or a film when the time is right, because obviously it's going to be tricky to adapt because it is a book about terrorism and Muslims, even though it's in context of the wars. Um, in a book form, it's easier to explain context by talking about background and history. And in television and film, it's a little bit harder. So I'd have to find a way to bridge that gap so I don't end up promoting stereotypes, which would not be my intention at all.
Idea who you would like to share the screen with?
Oh my God. There were so many actors that were in the web series, the CBC Gem web series Zarqa, and I would love to include a lot of those actors again, for sure.
Okay, well, we're going to look for that because, like I said, I could see it in my head. And I'm wondering now, I've asked you a lot of questions. If anybody in the audience would like to ask you something about, I'm going to hold up the book, Jameela Green Ruins Everything, or your television work. Sure.
Thank you so much. So inspiring. And I wanted to also, as a fellow Muslim, also wanted to learn about the naming of the title of the book and what inspired that.
So there was so much discussion when ISIS first came out. People were like, "Don't even use the word ISIS." I think in Toronto they were Toronto Star. I can't remember. They had used the word Daesh, and people were using other words because they were trying to take away their power and fear, and even the word. They didn't like the word Islam in there, and I just thought, okay, because people were so afraid of this group because they had become like this monster in people's minds. I thought the way to take away a group's power is to ridicule it and to mock it, and so I thought, what could be the most silly name to give to an ISIS-like group? So I decided to call them the Dominion of the Islamic Caliphate and Kingdom. And the original title of the book was The Rise and Fall of Dick. And I was able to keep that title for a very long time. It actually sold, if you look at Publishers Marketplace, it actually sold with that title. And then a couple of months in, the marketing people, had a Zoom with me and they said, listen, a book with that title, just, people are going to Google it and all the wrong images are going to come up. So we feel that you need to change it. And it was so heartbreaking because my children just loved that title. They just wanted it to be that title. But I fought the publishers for as long as I could. I fought them and fought them and fought them until I thought I was going to actually lose the publishing deal. So I said, okay, I capitulated, and we went through a whole bunch of titles, and this one was the one that everyone liked the most.
Okay. Thank you.
So much. Does anyone else have any questions for Zarqa?
Hi, this is a more general question and not about the book, but I think the book festival in Toronto has done a really good job of getting really diverse authors, and a lot of people, a lot of authors have rightfully said that representation is important, and being able to tell the stories of people that are traditionally underrepresented. But I was wondering, as an author, do you ever struggle with the pressure of telling stories because you belong to a certain group? And an example comes to mind is I have an Indian friend who is a jazz drummer in Toronto, and he always, people tell him like, "Oh, you should bring in Indian music into like the music you're making," and he's like, I don't want to, like, I'm not inspired by that at the moment, and I don't want to just make Indian music because I'm from India. So while I feel like representation is important, I wonder if you ever struggle with having to tell stories of certain people or certain stories because you're from that group versus um, telling the story that you want to tell that might be about a white person, for instance.
No, it's an excellent question. I like when I made the CPC Gem series, I didn't want it to be about anything that was like Muslimly related or culture, or I just wanted to be a universal story about a divorced Muslim woman who finds out that her ex-husband is marrying a white yoga instructor half her age.
Oh God.
And I wanted it to be a universal story of jealousy and revenge and feeling devalued as a woman who is in middle age. It had nothing to do with anything. It just happened to be that that woman was Muslim and wearing hijab. Like that was it. And to me, I think that was an important story to tell, because whenever we see stories of Muslim women in hijab, they're always sort of very like, I mean, I'm sure there are, you know, like the whole of the whole range of stories we could tell about that woman. We get the sliver, like she's a wife or a mother or oppressed or married to the Taliban, or escaping an abusive relationship, or very meek. But you never see that woman having agency over her own romantic life. Like you don't see that character. And I hear what you're saying. And I said, let's do something totally like that's a human story, but you don't see those human stories being told about this issue, divorce, aging, revenge, anger, attraction, desire. Like where are those stories with Muslim women? So that was really important to me, sort of like to break out of the traditional stories and just tell a story about what does a woman do when she finds her ex-husband has moved on, and all his friends are saying, ooh, what's the ex gonna say when she finds out that you got an upgrade with your new wife. And she's just like isn't gonna take it, sitting down, and she decides to take agency and get her revenge, and a series of unfortunate events happen as she does this. And that was really important for me because I felt like those stories have never been told. Like you never see those. It's always kind of the more traditional stories that we hear about. And so it was important for me to sort of just let's do a universal story about a universal issue that has nothing to do with, being in the mosque or in Ramadan, or, terrorism, or like Taliban, like just straight up, jealousy and revenge. Let's do that. So that was my answer to how to combat those issues, is just to make a story that I feel is important, that has a universal appeal to every human being.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to read the book and watch the series.
Two excellent questions. We have time for one more. Well, I'm full of questions, so I'll ask you one more. Um, the book is full of sympathetic characters, and I think that must be a deliberate decision on your part, where everybody's motivation is clear, and there might be viewpoints that the reader might not agree with, but that doesn't mean that those characters don't have our sympathy. And I was wondering about your decision to characterize that way, and also how you did it.
Yeah, it was really important to give a human face to human beings, even people who have made bad decisions, because I feel like we put Muslims in a different category than we put other people who have made bad decisions in a different category. And like, the classic example are the men who got put in Guantanamo Bay. Like that goes against every international law of justice. Like if someone commits a crime, you give them a fair trial, you sentence them, they pay for their crimes. You don't just remove them and put them on some island somewhere and then you never deal with them again and they don't know. Like that's not what, and it's because their humanity has been stripped of them. And people say, well, they're Muslim and they're not truly human and we don't have to treat them like human beings. And so we remove that. They're like monsters that we have never seen ever on earth. And so this characterization of Muslims and terrorism isn't applied to other groups. And as a result, people don't really blink an eye, and that you can attack a country like Iraq in 2003 had, was attacked for having weapons of mass destruction, which never existed. And so you destroy a country, you kill millions, maim millions, exile millions, and no apology, no reparations. You just say, oops, sorry. You can get away with that because those people aren't really considered human beings. They're just like disposable, they deserve that. That's who they are. They would have been terrible. Like that attitude is what continues the cycle of violence, and destruction in a lot of brown and Black countries. And I wanted to give humanity back to people so that we can look at them as, fully formed human beings who deserve, even if they're done bad things, who deserve a sentence, who deserve justice, but who don't deserve to be buried somewhere and forgotten. And we're not even going to deal with them because they don't deserve to be dealt with. That, we don't do that with white people, but we do that with brown and Black people. And I wanted to bring that humanity back and give story and life. And that was why I did it.
Thank you very much. I have the book here. I'm going to hold it up so you can all see the cover. I recommend it highly, but I just want to give you one warning if you are reading it in a public place that you will be laughing out loud. So please know that. And you may want to choose your book reading place accordingly. It was so wonderful to speak with you, Zarqa. It's a pleasure and an honor, and I am going to look for it on the New York Times bestseller list because I'm going to find it pretty high up on that list. I know it. And on behalf of Word on the Street, I'd like to thank you all for attending this event at the Great Book Stage. Up next is a celebration of First Nations Communities Reads Awards, and later we'll hear from Cody Caetano, Shannon Webb Campbell, Drew Hayden Taylor in a panel tribute to the late, great Lee Miracle, and more. And I'll just leave you with one reminder that the Word on the Street is a free festival run by a nonprofit organization. If you could please consider supporting the festival so that it can continue to celebrate the best in Canadian books and magazines. And if you wish to make a donation, please visit the Word on the Street website. Thank you, Zarqa. Thank you, everyone. Continued success to you.